Good evening. You're watching AWANI Tonight with me, Farhana Sheikh. The decision on which country will lead the Asian Monetary Fund, AMF, will be based on an agreement among the 68 countries involved. Deputy Finance Minister Datuk Sri Ahmad Maslan says there are plans to replace the usage of the US dollar in trade between ASEAN countries, but the establishment of the AMF is still in its proposal stages.
Walaupun demikian, dari segi penggunaan mata wang ketika perdagangan antara negara-negara ini, negara yang sedang menggunakan mata wang masing-masing berniaga dengan negara kita ada 3 setakat ini. China 16% menggunakan renminbi, Thailand baht 16.1% daripada total penyelesaian perdagangan, dan Indonesia rupiah 16.6%.
The Asian Monetary Fund was first proposed by Japan in 1997 during the Asian financial crisis, but the idea has never been implemented. In February, Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim had proposed reviving the idea, which he said could create a buffer against economic crisis in the region.
Bersih has urged the 6 states heading into elections to officially inform the Election Commission of their dissolution dates so that a polling date can be determined quickly. The electoral watchdog said this could avoid uncertainty and help many plan for the upcoming polls.
According to Bersih, an earlier announcement of the election date can facilitate planning for everyone involved, including election officials, political parties, the security forces, businesses and the voters. The group opposed for the EC to wait for 9 days for the last dissolution date to happen for Negeri Sembilan on June 30th. Earlier today, the EC was informed that the Kelantan State Legislative Assembly will be dissolved this Thursday. Elections must be held within 60 days of the dissolution of an assembly. Kedah, Kelantan, Terengganu, Penang, Negeri Sembilan and Selangor are all due to go to the polls within the next 2 months.
Several telecommunication providers will block the sending and receiving of phone numbers and personal details via SMS from July 2nd. Among those confirmed to be implementing the block include Celcom DJ, Maxis and U-Mobile.
The move applies to both local and international messages, but businesses using legitimate enterprise short codes will still be allowed to include personal details. In February, the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, MCMC, issued a directive to block URLs, phone numbers and other personal details from being sent or received via SMS. This was to prevent consumers from becoming victims of online fraud. While the directive was not mandatory, Maxis, Celcom DG and U-Mobile had blocked the use of URLs in SMS from May.
The proposed establishment of the Malaysia Media Council does not contradict the principles of media freedom espoused by the government. Deputy Communications and Digital Minister Teo Ni Cheng said that media freedom does not mean unfettered freedom, but the responsibility to report from valid sources and in an ethical and fair manner.
Kerana apabila kita sebut kebebasan media, dia bukan kebebasan yang tak ada hak tanpa hak. Kami juga nak pelaporan yang beretika, yang adil, yang dari sumber yang sahih. Dan kita nampak negara jiran kita, Indonesia, mereka juga ada Dewan Pers. Itu salah satu bentuk majlis media. Tetapi apa yang kita nak ialah regulation itu adalah daripada industri sendiri. Jadi supaya tiada orang yang boleh salah guna kuasa dalam konteks kita, selalu ada orang risau bahawa sebagai kerajaan kami akan gunalah undang-undang yang sedia ada untuklah mengekang kebebasan media. Tetapi kalau regulation itu adalah daripada industri sendiri, saya rasa itu adalah lebih adil dan juga boleh memastikan kepentingan semua pihak.
Teo said the MCMC is actively engaging in discussions with the Pro-Tem Committee, which comprises journalists, publishers, broadcasters and news organizations on the matter. The Malaysian Media Council bill is expected to be tabled in Parliament in March 2024 at the latest.
Nearly a third of domestic workers in Malaysia work under forced labour conditions. This is according to a survey of 1,201 migrant domestic workers in Southeast Asia by the International Labour Organization, ILO. The findings of this survey have raised serious concerns as the figure in Malaysia is alarmingly high compared to 7% and 4% in Singapore and Thailand respectively. We speak to Anna Olsen of the ILO to discuss the prevalence of forced labour in this sector.
The situation of forced labour among the sample that we surveyed is obviously pretty shocking. To see a finding of 29% of migrant domestic workers in conditions that indicate forced labour is a terrible result, I think, for Malaysia and Malaysian society.
In explaining Malaysia's poor performance, Anna said in countries where governments and employers view domestic workers as risk rather than an essential worker, there could be tighter migration requirements and restrictions on domestic workers' freedoms that can amount to forced labour.
Malaysia has ratified the Forced Labour Convention, which is the ILO's Convention on Forced Labour, which gives a definition of forced labour. And the definition is made up of two parts. Firstly, that the work is involuntary or performed involuntarily. And second, that the work is performed under the threat or a menace of a penalty. So some of the indicators of involuntariness are some of the classic things that you would see if you are locked inside, unable to leave. If you are doing excessive overtime, you can't refuse overtime. These are the kinds of indicators we see of involuntariness. For threat or menace of penalty, the second part of the definition, things like actual or threatened physical violence or sexual violence could be a threat or a menace of penalty. Particularly concerning is being told that you will be deported or being told that you will be the authorities will be informed about your situation. And these are the kinds of things that we source the sample responding to in our Malaysia survey. Now, both of these things, the involuntariness and the threat of the menace of penalty, need to be together for an indication of forced labour, and that's what we found in 29% of the sample from Malaysia.
To rid forced labour conditions among domestic workers, Anna recommends a government scheme that would allow for random checkups at homes to see how the workers are doing.
First of all, to devise a government scheme aimed at detecting abuse, including forced labour, and ensuring that this scheme includes random house checks or domestic worker interviews. So part of the problem that we often have with domestic work is that there's nobody checking on the conditions of work within private homes. So one of the things that we think we could do is to start to consider how best to reach these workers and make sure that they're okay. Day off legislation, ensuring that migrant domestic workers and all domestic workers have the ability to take one 24-hour consecutive period day off each week, as is provided in the ILO's Convention on Domestic Work. But just that ability to go outside, to be able to potentially talk to your friends, to reach the authorities if you are in a situation of exploitation or abuse, is absolutely critical in bringing these kinds of numbers down.
Countries that are involved in the use of forced labour are also risking their reputation in the international community, said Anna.
The risks, or the immediate risks, are related to the reputation of Malaysia and its international standing. I don't think any country wants to be considered a place where human rights abuses like forced labour are tolerated and accepted by the society. So that reputational risk, while it is sometimes downplayed, I think it's actually extremely important to the character of the nation and to the self-esteem of the country within an international context. The other side of this, of course, is that where we see economies that have significant rates of forced labour, we don't see positive economic development, not inclusive economic development, not sustainable economic development. And of course, that's what everybody wants for their own country. And of course, that's absolutely what we want for Malaysia as well.
We will go for a quick break. Stay tuned for more. Welcome back. The U.S. Coast Guard confirmed that underwater noises were detected in a search area for the tourist submersible that went missing on a dive to the Titanic wreckage. The noise was picked up by a Canadian aircraft that's involved in the search for the miniature submarine. More vessels are being sent to the search site off the North American coast. The submersible, which has 5 people on board, was lost on Sunday as it made a 3,800 meters descent to the Titanic wreck. A large-scale search effort by the U.S. and Canadian Coast Guard search is still underway to locate the submarine. The submarine's oxygen supply is expected to run out by Thursday. Tesla CEO Elon Musk said he plans to make significant investments in India following talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New York. Musk described Modi as open and supportive of new companies in a way that accrues to India's advantage.
India, because he's pushing us to make significant investments in India, which it is something that we intend to do. Yeah, well, I think there's a tremendous amount of potential for all 3 pillars of the sustainable energy future. The 3 pillars being sustainable energy generation through solar and wind primarily, and obviously India is great for solar.
Tesla currently has one mega factory in Asia, in Shanghai, which accounts for more than half of Tesla's global deliveries in 2022. In May, Musk said he would likely choose a location for a new Tesla factory by the end of the year and that India was an interesting option. Musk's push into the Indian market has been in the works for a long time, but he shelved the entry plans due to high import tax structures. US companies are looking to reduce their reliance on China as a manufacturing base amid tensions between Washington and Beijing.
A United Nations expert has urged ASEAN to impose measures to hold Myanmar's junta accountable. Thomas Andrews, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar, said the bloc had run out of alternative options to the ongoing crisis.
And now a group of governments that have just this week convened a high-level meeting with junta representatives that can have the dangerous effect of legitimizing the junta and undermining ASEAN unity at precisely the point that we can least afford to have that occur.
He said ASEAN must not engage with Myanmar's military leaders as there had been no progress in implementing a 5-point peace plan agreed between the bloc and the junta after a 2021 coup.
The junta should not be invited to attend any ASEAN meetings. At a minimum, ASEAN must not allow Myanmar military personnel to participate in these or any other defense meetings. Indonesia should show leadership alongside of other ASEAN meetings and not attend if the invitations to the junta military personnel are not rescinded.
Andrews' remarks come as Thai media reported the US plans to slap fresh sanctions on state-owned Myanmar Bank.
Climate activists in Paris transformed the site of the Eiffel Tower to look like a wind turbine, calling for a greater action on climate change. This comes as world leaders meet in the city to seek ways to overhaul the world's development banks to better meet the financial challenges of climate action.
Activists held a floating invisible banner made from netting bearing a drawing of turbines. The banner's message called for an end to fossil fuel finance and for those responsible to pay for the environmental damage caused by the industry. According to the activists, the wind turbine represents the need for renewable energy and a sustainable world, adding that the Earth cannot afford any more fossil fuel. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund have been criticized for not factoring climate change into lending decisions and for being dominated by wealthy countries. This means that the nations most in need and most vulnerable to global warming are left out of the decision-making process.
That's all we have for you on AWANI tonight. I'm Fana Sheh. Thank you for watching.